I've invested in sports cards for almost 20 years, and I've worked with hundreds of card investors ranging from complete beginners to people running serious card businesses. In this video, I'm answering some of the best questions I've received recently through YouTube comments, direct messages, and inside my card investing community. And for each one, my goal is to give you some actionable takeaways that you can apply to your own sports card investing journey. Let's jump in. Question 1. If you had $25,000 to invest in sports cards, what would you do with it? So the first thing I'll say with this one is if you don't actually know what you're doing in the card market yet, I'd actually recommend just taking it slow or get some help so you don't get taken to the cleaners. There's a certain power that comes with having money in this market because it frees up different choices and different opportunities that if you don't have money, you have a harder time pursuing. But it's only powerful if you actually know what you're doing with it. Otherwise, spending a bunch of money is kind of just risky. Now, if it was me, and let's say my card investing business and all my current inventory just randomly disintegrated overnight or something, but I got to keep my skills and I got to keep my knowledge, here's what I would do with it. So I would think about it like this. 25K gives us plenty to work with, and we can afford to tie up some money too without slowing ourselves down. So the way that I would do this is I would set up kind of two sides to the house here, or almost think of it like two different buckets. So the goal of bucket number 1 is to create cash flow. The best thing we can do is to get ourselves into a position where we've constantly got profits coming back in the door. So that 25K isn't just a one-time thing, but we're actually turning it into ongoing profits. And then my goal with bucket number 2 is to lock in plays that give us long-term upside. Now for bucket 1, I'm talking about plays like grading or playing the seasonal market swings where we're doing a little bit of holding, but it's a shorter term hold before we're flipping out of those cards and getting to the next one. So let's just say 15K goes to the cash flow side and the 10K goes to the long-term side. So for the cash flow side, what I'm going to do is split that 15K into 3 different grading submissions. So I'm going to put 5K, including my grading fees, into the first one, then the second one, and then again in the third one. And that's going to give us regular cash flow as we start getting those orders back. And I like to live by what I call the 2x rule. So I'm looking for cards where the PSA 10 value is at least 2x the value of the raw card plus the grading fee. So basically double your total cost. And that ensures that we're targeting cards that actually have meaningful upside. So when we get the grade we're looking for, we actually win big. For example, this 2023 Victor Wembanyama Panini Select Mezzanine Silver Prism sells for around $100 to $150 ungraded, but as PSA 10s, they sell for over $700, at least at the time of this recording. So let's just say we're using the $80 grading fee so we can turn this card around a little bit faster too. Even with that higher grading fee, you're still getting a 3x multiplier on your money for every single PSA 10 you get. So again, I'd be looking for a number of cards that fit that kind of mold, and I would be sending those off in the first month, and I would put together a submission for month 1, another one for month 2, and another one for month 3. And you can start to see where that would create cash flow as we're able to turn those dollars around, reinvest them, and do it all over again. Now, the reason why I like this play is because it lets us continue to build our bankroll with a predictable timeline. The tricky thing about speculating on player performance where we need them to do something special on the field for their values to rise is that we don't have a timeline. Even if we think we might have an idea, we're still trying to predict the future, and that introduces uncertainty into the business. So grading is powerful because it's a learnable skill, and once you know what kinds of cards to submit that have strong upside and a chance at a PSA 10, you are in the driver's seat to control your own destiny. Now, the other side of the house is where it starts to get more fun. So once we've got cash flow, that's what fuels the rest of the business. So you're not just running some expensive hobby where you're always pulling more money from your family checking account, right? Like we want the business to fuel itself. So first of all, we've got that other 10K that we set aside that we can use for this. But then as we start to create grading profits, we can either reinvest those profits into the grading side of the business, or we can pull them and put them into more of the upside part of the business. Now, what I'm trying to do for long-term upside is get into cards that have a strong chance at paying off big over the long haul. So for me, my strategy when I'm investing in a card that I expect to hold for more than a year, I'm looking for the best card of the best player in the highest grade that I can fit into my budget. And the reason why I do that is because the data agrees. If we look at the long-term history of the card market, those are the exact types of cards that tend to hold value and rise in value the most over time. So for this category, we're looking for the GOAT caliber players or those inner circle Hall of Famers. So Jordan, LeBron, Steph Curry, Tom Brady for football, Mickey Mantle for baseball, and you can also include the guys that are on their way or at least look like they have a chance at being in that discussion. So active players like Shohei Ohtani is a pretty obvious one for baseball. Patrick Mahomes belongs in that conversation given the number of rings he has at his age. And the other thing you can do is look at some of the young rising star caliber players who you think might be a part of that conversation a few years out. So this is where a Victor Wembanyama might fit. He hasn't quite accomplished enough because he's still just too young to put himself into the inner circle Hall of Fame conversation. Like that doesn't make any sense when you're in your early 20s still. But if you look at what he's been able to accomplish early in his career, that puts him on that trajectory to at least be a part of the conversation for players that could elevate into that category. And those are the names that are always interesting to people. The key thing that drives value in the card market is that people are always trying to figure out where demand is going to be, and they put their money into cards they believe are going to be in higher demand in the future than they are today. So think about who belongs in that category, and that's who I'd be putting my money into if I was trying to get some exposure into some of those long-term bets. So back to the original question of what do we do with the 25K? Well, we split it up. We put part of it into our grading operation. We get that flowing, and then over time, as we continue to make those grading plays, we pull more of that money out and continue to make these long-term bets. Question number 2, when would you buy PSA 10s versus grading cards yourself? It's a good question, and the way I think about this is I always want to start by grading myself if possible, because that's just the easiest and most predictable path to money once you know how to actually grade. But the problem is availability. So that's the bottleneck you're going to run into. And sometimes you don't have a choice. So for example, if you're confident it's the right time of year to buy a certain player, but you can't actually find cards of that player, you don't really have a choice. You've got to kind of go and get whatever you can find. And sometimes that might just mean going ahead and paying the premium to lock in that card that's already graded a PSA 10. A good example of this, I bought a bunch of Caleb Williams cards in the early football offseason because typically that's a good time of year to get a price that's going to be relatively low compared to where prices are right before the following season. But a lot of his key sets from his rookie season are a little bit tougher to grade, so I didn't want to mess with it, and I just paid the premiums to lock in the exact cards that I was looking for as they showed up on the market. Now the key here is when you're buying a PSA 10, the question you've got to ask yourself is, do you have an actual strategy? Because it can't just be, well, I thought this was a cool card, or I saw someone talking about this guy on Instagram. I want to know, can you name why you think that card's value is going to rise and when you think it's going to happen? Because if you can't explain those things to me, you don't have a real strategy. And that's where I see people getting into trouble when they're buying cards that are already graded. So if you think about grading a card, when that card goes from a raw card to a PSA 10 is the single biggest value jump most cards will ever see. Like there's nothing that the player can do on the field that's going to make the value rise higher than that for most cards. Yes, there are exceptions to this, but for the vast majority of cards, that's it. That is the biggest value jump that card's going to see. So first of all, I want to be the one that gets to capitalize on that value jump if it's possible. But if I am targeting the card that's already graded, one of the things I like to do to put myself in a better position to win here is to target rarity. Because since we know we don't have that built-in grading opportunity where we might be able to double or triple or 5x the value of our card just by getting it graded, we got to have a different strategy in mind. And rarer cards give us more control over the price when we go to sell. So for example, if I've got a card where there's 100 copies for sale and I've just got one of the 100, I don't really get a say in the price. I've just got to sell it for whatever the most recent copies have sold for. Because if I try to price my card way higher than everyone else's, I just get ignored and laughed at probably because people are just like, well, I'm just going to go and buy one of these other 99 copies that actually is fair market price. Now on the flip side, if I have the only copy of a card for sale, people either get to pay my price or they don't get to have the card. So you get to influence the value far more. Now, you can't actually make someone pay your price, but you at least get to set the market and say, take it or leave it. Question number 3. I'm making money, but growth has been slow. What am I missing? So the way I'd think about this one is to ask yourself the question of what is the single thing that's holding you back? And then focus all of your energy on solving whatever that thing is. And here's a hint. Oftentimes, it's either that you're stuck inside your comfort zone or you're spending your time on the wrong things. Now, here's the kicker. Most people already know what they should be doing. They just aren't doing enough of it. And you've got to realize that growth slows when your actions don't match your goals. So if you tell me you want to make $3,000 a month, but then I see you over here dealing in a bunch of $5 and $7 cards, like there's not a realistic way to get there on a monthly basis without doing enormous volume that's arguably not repeatable. So, if we're trying to solve this, what do we do? Well, first of all, you have to look yourself in the mirror and be realistic about where you're spending your time. So, I was guilty of this in my early days because I would be thinking about my business all the time. And this is, 20 years ago now, but I was thinking about cards. I was looking at message boards trying to learn about cards, but I wasn't actually taking action for a lot of that time. It was a lot of like mental gymnastics trying to just figure out what's what. And like at the end of the day, you do have to take action. Learning is important. Otherwise, I wouldn't make these videos, but you've got to go and do something with it. So remember that thinking about your business is not the same as taking action in your business. And then the second thing is just to ask yourself what actions actually make you the most money, and then do more of those things. It seems so simple, but so many people do not do this. Here's a real example. So a guy, we'll just call him Chris. Now, Chris reached out to me and he wanted some help scaling his card business. And the thing about Chris is he's really sharp. He was already doing tons of volume. He was putting in the work. Last year, he did about 150K of sales, but he only made $30,000 of profit, which, that's plenty of money. But for someone doing that much volume, I would have expected to see higher profit numbers. And so we started working together. And as we dug into what he was actually doing, we uncovered something really interesting. He was running an eBay store that had a couple thousand cards, but about 90% of those cards were between $2 of value and $10 of value. And guess where he was making all of his money? The other 10% of those cards that were much higher end. And guess what? He also enjoyed those higher end cards more. But for whatever reason, he had all this inventory. He was thinking, well, if I get people into my store, then maybe they'll buy more stuff. But the problem and the reason why he only had a 20% profit margin last year is because he was spending his time on the wrong thing. So what he ended up doing is we had him end all of those listings. He sent about 1,500 cards out for consignment where someone else did the work for him so that he could get his time back. And no longer did he have to ship all these $2 and $3 cards out. And he changed his focus from those lower end cards to doing fewer cards that were just higher end and higher upside. And you can probably guess what happened. Through the first 5 months of working together, he's already made more net profit than he did in all of last year combined. And his confidence is through the roof and he's enjoying it a lot more. So moral of the story here is figure out what is the thing that's going to get you the best ROI for your time. Like where is your time best spent? Figure it out and go all in. And by the way, if you're finding this video valuable and you'd like my help working through your situation, that's exactly what we do inside my card investing community, Ignite. We've got weekly live calls where members can ask questions just like these and get personalized feedback directly from me. And we also have a highly active community for ongoing 24/7 card talk, so you never get stuck. If that sounds worth a look, I'll leave a link in the description. But otherwise, let's get to the next question. Question number 4, is it better to specialize in one sport or to diversify? Now, billionaire investor Warren Buffett talks about the circle of competence. And basically the concept here is to spend your time and your money on the things that you know best. And I could not agree more with this in the card space, because if you're putting money into things that you don't understand, don't you think that that's going to put you at a pretty clear disadvantage compared to if you're putting it into a sport or a player that you do understand? Again, simple logic here, but all too often we see people doing all these different things just, I don't know why, like they think that they have to for some reason. I'm telling you, you don't. Focus is powerful in this space because guess what? The more time you spend on one category, one product, one player, the better you're going to get at it. I'll give you an example here. So over the years, I've sold over $250,000 of Nolan Arenado cards. He's a guy that I liked coming up as a prospect, and then I always thought he was undervalued even after he made it to the majors and was hitting all these home runs, and it seemed like his values were just way lower than they should be for a player that was doing what he could do with both his bat and his glove. And there was a pretty long stretch where I felt like he was very undervalued. So I was actively buying and selling his cards for a pretty long time. And guess what happens when you do that? You get really good at a player's market. You just see so many different cards. You see the sales. You get so many repetitions. And you start to understand a player's market like the back of your hand. And the reason this matters is because eventually you start seeing opportunities that other people simply cannot see because they don't have the depth of knowledge that you have because they haven't spent that much time in the market for that particular card or player. There was a time when I came across a person that was trying to sell out of his Arenado collection. He was moving to a different part of the country and needed some money, and so he was liquidating his entire collection. And it just so happened that I knew the market better than just about anyone for Arenado at the time. And it wasn't cheap. There were over 300 graded cards. And I could see that the top 10% of those cards were going to get me back almost all of my money. And then the other 90% of the cards would be the profit. So I could just slowly piece those out. I would be able to recoup my money relatively quickly if I could just move those top 30 cards, basically. And so that made me feel really good about the deal. Now, don't get me wrong. He wasn't giving me a 90% discount. I'm just saying this was a top heavy deal where there was a lot of value in the top 20, 30% of that deal. And then the rest of them were a lot of little cards. But I was able to see such a quick path to profit just because I knew the market so well. And that's what helped me jump on that deal before someone else did. It was a 5-figure deal, and I ended up tripling my money by the time I had sold through all of the cards. So everyone wants to talk about diversifying, but man, focus is kind of like a superpower in this market as long as you're targeting a player that's at least liquid enough to be easy to sell cards on the back end. But wait, Ryan, what if I want to expand to a new category? Well, go for it. Like, you can still do new things. You can try new things. I would just use a smaller overall percentage of your available budget to try something new until you get a little bit more comfortable with that and expand your knowledge a little bit in that category before you go dumping big money into it. So align your spending, align your investing with your expertise. Question number 5, how do you know when you're investing versus gambling? So I'm actually going to change the question here just so it's a little more clear, because I think the term investing in the card space gets used to mean different things to different people. But I believe the heart of this question is truly, how do you know if you're running a card business versus gambling? And the answer to this question is actually pretty simple. So you've got to just look at your strategy and ask yourself, is this strategy within my control? And if the answer is yes, then you're running a card business. If the answer is no, and you're someone who needs a player to do something or something has to break your way in order to win, that's more of a gamble. So a couple examples here. Grading is a learnable skill that is well within your control because you get to control what you send and when you send it. And so that creates predictable results. Another example, playing the seasonal market swings and buying at the right time of the year and selling at the right time of the year. This is a learnable pattern because the same pattern repeats over and over and over again in the card market. And so once you learn that pattern, you can leverage it to make money. Now, on the flip side, if we're talking about speculating on player performance, that's a form of gambling. What about buying cards for the playoffs, hoping for an increase? That's a form of gambling. They're calculated gambles because you get to pick what player and what cards you're going after, but they're gambles nonetheless, guys, because no one can predict the future with perfect accuracy. No matter how smart we think we are going to get it wrong sometimes when we're trying to predict the future. And the other part of this is often you're just not going to have a timeline. So even if you're right, it might be a much longer wait than you originally thought. And that means your money is tied up in a card where you can't do anything with that money. You're stuck in that play. And so you miss out on all the other possible opportunities that you could have used that money to pursue. So the crux of this one comes down to control. If you can control it, that's a strategy. If you can't control it, that's a gamble. Question number 6, I only have 5 hours per week. Where would you focus your time? So one of the best parts about cards is that you can fit cards around your life rather than having to fit your life around cards. For context here, I built the vast majority of my card business on the side of a full-time day job and busy family life as a dad. And that's how most people do this. Like, most people aren't just jumping in with 2 feet saying, I'm going full-time with cards from zero. That makes no sense even because you don't have to do that. You can build it as a side hustle. And if you want to eventually go full-time, just do more of it and build it up until your income matches or exceeds what you need to pay for your life. But that's only a very small percentage of people in this market. The vast majority are doing this as a side hustle. So if you have limited time and you've got to figure out where do we want to focus, the main thing to ask yourself here is what's the hourly rate that you want to make? And then you've got to take actions that align with that hourly rate. Now, in the beginning, when you're brand new, you can actually dramatically increase your earning capacity, like how much money you're capable of making with cards, by doing just one thing. Any guesses what that thing might be? It's learning. So there's absolutely nothing that's going to get you a higher ROI than learning from people who are ahead of you so you can skip the mistakes that those people made and get focused on the right things far faster than if you try to figure it out solo. But beyond the learning phase, you have to figure out how to get more for your time. And here's a hint, by the way. This is also a big part of how you scale in the card market. Now, I'll take you back to my early days because I would grind out the flip plays all day long because I had far more time than I had money. And so I'd find a good deal off of eBay where I could buy a card for $3 and sell it on eBay for $8. And then I just did this over and over and over again to build bankroll. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of time. But back then I had the time. Now my time is far more valuable to me. I've got a business, I've got a family, and I'm still flipping cards extremely actively. So I want as much ROI as possible for every hour that I invest in my card business. And so a couple things I do here. So the first one is I focus on cards that have meaningful upside. And oftentimes that means doing fewer actual cards, but just focusing on cards that have higher value. So think back to Chris's example that we talked about, where he was doing all those low dollar cards, but he was making all of his money from the higher end stuff. Just focus on the higher dollar, higher upside, higher value cards, and you're going to go a lot faster and get more for your time. Now, strategically, grading is a great place to start because you don't actually need that much time. The only time suck is when you're looking for cards that are clean enough to get graded, but then it's pretty quick to actually get a grading order out the door, and then it's just kind of the waiting game of waiting for PSA to turn your cards around. 5 hours per week is more than enough time to be successful with grading. Now, the other big thing that I do here is I focus on actions that are going to actually move the needle. And this means outsourcing low value tasks. You got to realize that scanning and listing and negotiating and selling and shipping a card that costs $5 takes the exact amount of time to sell as a card that's $5,000. So I know budgets are a thing, and like if you don't have the inventory, you don't have it. But instead of splitting hairs over low dollar cards, why not combine the value of what you've got and go to a higher dollar card where you're just going to be able to make more money per card and then go so much faster over time? And more importantly, it's just going to help you be more efficient so you can get more out of every single hour that you put into your business. So no, you don't need more time. You need to make better decisions about where you spend that time. All right, guys, I hope you found this valuable. And if you like this format and you'd like my help on your card business, join us inside Ignite. I'll leave a link in the description if you'd like to learn more, but otherwise don't forget to subscribe and we'll see you on the next video.